in life, I've learned that all the presentations must not be finished. So I've been given 30 minutes, and this presentation was for 1 hour. So it means by the time I finish this presentation, you've lost 30 minutes of the presentation. So it's not my problem. So thank you so much, Roman, for inviting me, and also this university that has been pestering me. They want me to come in their board, but I've decided maybe I'll come. Maybe.
Thank you. Thank you.
Maybe I'll come.
Thank you.
So when I was seated there were a number of issues that came from other presentations that came before me. So I want to start by highlighting those. One of the issues that came but was not explained in disaster risk reduction and management is this idea or the nature of humanity to want to undermine indigenous knowledge systems. So it's in disaster management, we really need to actually elevate indigenous knowledge systems. So I can assure you 100%, my head on the block, if we'd followed nature in Morocco, we'd have saved lives, because the animals know when to migrate when there's a disaster coming. The animals have got a better sense of picking the disaster than us. So that is some of the knowledge that we've lost in disaster risk reduction. So we discover if it's going to be a dry season, there are birds that will nest right in the valley. It's going to be a wet season, they will nest up there in the highest trees. And those are indicators that we need to know. We know it's going to be a drought. This is not rocket science. This is actually what we grew up knowing. You know, there are tree species that will have lots of fruits because it's going to be a drought. So some of that knowledge has been lost, and then we are running into a disaster knowing, because the knowledge is what has been lost. Some of it is in symmetries. When I say symmetries, those that had knowledge, that knowledge are dead, and they died with that knowledge. So then we want to challenge every individual and young academics, young scholars, to start documenting issues around disaster risk reduction and indigenous knowledge systems, because we can actually save lives, especially when we make it with modern knowledge systems. I guess one of my PhDs that we did was a student in Ghana looking at some of those issues. So when I was given a talk, I think the abstract could be there somewhere. But when I saw this session, I said, no, maybe I'll reorient my talk around Southern Africa disaster risk management and human security, a call to address layered disaster risk. So when I talk about layered, we don't have one disaster. So these disasters actually are layered. When actually from COVID, then we're going to discover maybe it's going to be droughts, it's going to be floods, it's going to be fires, everything. So we are dealing with a multiplicity of disasters. And that has changed our way of thinking as academics and as practitioners. So when I sit there, then I discovered that the room is almost half full of students. There are slides that I had to include in this presentation, and they're going to take maybe 5 minutes from my presentation, because now there are students that are in the room. So if there were no students, I would not have inserted this slide. I inserted them when I seated there, Roman. So these are the slides. So I really talk about what I call the pillars of success. So in the pillars of success, we have got 9 of them that maybe I may not go through them because of time. You can circulate the presentation later with them. One of them, which you can say pillar number 1, is get a vision and be on a mission. So why I'm saying that, when there's no vision, people perish. And if you don't have a vision, then somebody must actually lead you and supervise you. So a lot of people, there's nothing for you to write. They'll give you the presentation, just listen. So a lot of us, we perish because we don't have what? We don't have a vision. Okay. And this thing is not made for tall people. It's made for people who are sitting. But anyway, the second one, which I want to talk about, is like stand up and be counted. Now, a world is full of people in the crowd. So I can't see you because they're in the crowd. So for you, I'm not talking to this, I'm talking to the student now. So for you to be counted, you need to be what? You need to be a hybrid, a person who can get specialists in more than one area of competence. So if you're in hospitality, we don't need you. If you're in disaster risk management, we don't need you. If you are possibly a teacher, we don't need you. The world requires a person who is a hybrid, a person who has got more than one area of competence. So we've passed the generation of saying, I'm a teacher, I'm specialized in IA, I'm an engineer. No. Because when disasters come, they require a combination of that. And I say people that are a hybrid, individuals that are a hybrid, then they've got a better success rate in life or in this generation. So I'm saying you need to stand up and what? And be counted. Time and activity management is important for young people. You know, people, they just disregard. I was telling you, it's about 5 minutes now, people should be coming in. Because that's how, when I was teaching, you come 15 minutes, the lecture's almost finishing. Now I've moved out of school now, class, I'm just doing a research. But time is important, time and activity management. So I'm saying that a lot of people, a day is got what, 24 hours. 8 hours for sleeping, that's what the doctors tell us, and they never sleep 8 hours. 8 hours for doing your work, and the question comes, where does the other 8 hours go? 8 hours go? Herein lies your competitive advantage in life. So the people who make it in life are people who make use of the other 8 hours. So if you're not working more than 8 hours a day, or maybe sleeping 8 hours, the doctors that say you should sleep and they don't sleep 8 hours, then it's going to be difficult for you to make it in life. So the other thing is plan to leave a legacy. There are people who say, I can't plant a tree because by the time it starts generating fruit, I will be dead. So then we are saying, we can't have a legacy to say, herein lies a man who terrorized our daughters in the community. That's not the kind of a legacy that we want you to live. We want you to live a legacy where people say, okay, herein lies a man who have made disaster risk management change its facets. So this is what we need you today. Discipline, obedience, think agriculture, think tourism, mining, you can do that. Be innovative. You can read about that. Then I say, take care of small things. Take care of what? Bigger things. Because smaller things always find space in between. So, you know, like people are worried about what kind of a hero am I wearing? What kind of a dress am I wearing? What kind of a tie am I wearing? Those are smaller things. So I say you need to learn to invest in bigger things. And those small things, what will find spaces somewhere else. So like, don't talk about small things that are vanity. You need to invest in education. Of course, for some, invest in marriage. Then we know that these are the big things that I think can change life. And number 9, leadership. Understand leadership. Leadership is not where you are in the queue. So leadership, you can lead from behind, you can lead from the middle, you can lead from front. But for me, leadership is the sphere, your sphere of magnetic influence. So for you, you've studied magnetism. You discover when you tip the filings, if you didn't do your experiment in school, that's your business. Where I come from, we did an experiment on magnetism. So you tape the iron filings and there is a magnet underneath there. What happens? It creates a magnetic sphere of influence. So for me, leadership is like you create a magnetic sphere of influence. And good leaders must not be seen. Good leaders must not be heard. Good leaders are felt. They are like salt. You can't see that there's salt in the food. You only taste the salt in the food. That's good leadership. So if you cannot be felt, you cannot be tested, you are being felt, you are being seen, you are not a good leader. And this generation is devoid of young people who are good leaders. That's why we're in problems. Because we've got a leadership poverty on the continent. And we might have leadership poverty right in this room. So I think that as young people, we need actually to grow that base of leadership. Why are you taking a photo? You are not a student. This was a presentation for students. Right. This was a presentation for you, the young people. Good. Now, this is the presentation for this day. Usually when I do my talks, I start by giving you what I want to say, and you can go to sleep because I would really be finished by what I want to say. And that is the first slide. Those are the key pointers for you to take home. Usually it's 4 to 5 key points that I think people should take home. And of course, if you've got time, I'm going to talk about the introduction, background, global increasing risk of slow onset and rapid climate events, displacement and migration, resilience building ambition everywhere by everyone. And of course, I conclude. Usually I conclude with one slide. So here, I'm going now to move into maybe some of the things that we might need to just because you was marketing Rhodes, and you guys are also marketing your university. I should market my own my own. Hey, okay. I lead a chair there at Exar at UNISA, being sponsored by Exar. I've been leading that chair for the past 15 years. So we do books, we do students, we do journal articles, but I think I should highlight this because it's of interest to my presentation today. So we've actually published 23 books from the XRO chair. Of these books, 18 of them have got my name on them, either as co-authored books or editors. So we've got climate change series, these are the books. We have sustainable development series, these are the books. We have the COVID series. By the way, this was the first global book on COVID-19 tourism. When I say global, I mean global book. Then we have got the series on tornadoes, cyclone. So all these books, you can find them online, some of them, most of them, especially those that have been done by Springer from this going up online. And of course, as usual, the capitalist, you can't buy those books. 130 something euro. Good. Capitalist. Right. Keep all these pointers there to take home. The first point that I want you to take home is we have a world layered with disasters. Fires, you spoke about fires. COVID-19 or COVID, floods, cyclones, tornadoes, heat waves, wars, earthquakes, you can add to the list. And the most important point there, it's no longer a north-south divide. So you can't, I always laugh. When we're still talking about disaster risk management, we're talking about Africa as a vulnerable continent. How many of us heard about that? Africa is a vulnerable continent. Developing countries are vulnerable countries. No. You know what? The disasters have equalized us now. So it's no longer a north-south divide. Why I'm saying so, you should actually be following what's going to happen. I'm going to fly some of the headlines there. You discover that the disasters have equalized us. So if the disasters have equalized us, we equally need to know that no one is what? Is safe until everybody is safe. So that idea of saying I'm from America, sorry, my sister, I'm not talking about you. Or I'm from Europe, I'm from so and so, we've got the capacity to raise helicopters, is over. Not when you talk about the Hawaiian disaster. With the sirens, with everything in the book around early warning systems, the town was razed to the ground. And I'm not talking about it in Africa, I'm talking in the US. So this actually tells us where we are exactly in terms of the desire and the need for us to be aware and have the capacity to address the disasters. So it's no longer a north-south divide. Disasters have inseparable linkages with the attainment of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and its embedded 16 intertwined or interlinked SDGs. How many of us have heard about the SDGs in here? Now, this is a disaster. Okay. How many of us have heard about the SDGs in here? Less than 10. Now, this is a disaster, this one. This is actually the face of a disaster. Because we are halfway in between the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and more than half the class is not aware. I didn't even say who you have read. I'm talking about awareness, just awareness. So now, this is actually how disasters manifest themselves. So if you don't read, for those that are Christians, the Bible says people perish because of what? Lack of knowledge. So you are going to be part of the person that will perish because of lack of knowledge, especially the young ones. We should be able to have known that the Sustainable Development Goals that were instituted in 2016, basically 2015, starting January 1, 2016. And they've actually articulated the global agenda for us to be sustainable up to 2030. And I'm sure after 2030, we're going to continue on the same trajectory. Now, to build disaster resilience or ambition in disaster resilience, we need to be ready regarding high-level political and management buy-in. I see my friend from Northwest is worried about high-level political buy-in and management buy-in. It's a major issue. We're not talking about readiness for disaster resilience. We need also policy frameworks, and not only policy frameworks. A lot of policy frameworks are outdated. I call those ones old generation policies. We need new generation policies. So when you take most of our disaster risk management policies or acts or climate change acts, they did not refer to maybe loss and damage or any other issues that we want them to be embedded in these new policies. So part of our work now in this generation is to make sure that those policies, we have revamped them to the level where they are modern and second or new generation policies. Because without that, then we don't have a basis for changing the thinking or the framework of disaster risk management. I think in South Africa, we tried to do that in 2002. We tried to revamp our Disaster Management Act to include climate change as one of the disasters. But I think we need to go more than that to understand loss and damage and where we are going in terms of that. Now, other issues there that are required is funding. We need funding. We need institutional capacity. We need individual capacity. We need education and awareness raising. We need networking. We need to scale up what I call quick and big wins programs and projects on the ground. So we can't just talk disaster risk management. We don't have projects on the ground. Do we have adequate early warning systems? Do we have sufficient search and rescue? Do we have sufficient issues in terms of recovery? So all these things you need to talk and we need to put them in place so that when the next disaster comes, my team was here in Port St. John's. We were actually doing the disaster in 2019. Remember, there was a flood here in 2019. So we came, my team came here, I was not here, but they came, they spent about 2 weeks talking to people, seeing what was happening in Port St. John's. You might see some of the pictures there if I get there. No one is safe until everyone is safe. I like this statement. There were people somewhere there in the north who thought they were safe until we started seeing graves and shipwreckages because of the drought that ravaged Europe. But then all along, people thought they were safe. So no one is safe until everybody on the continent and in the world is safe. Not only that, we also need to harness new technologies like artificial intelligence in disaster risk management and reduction. So there's technology. I think one of the speakers here spoke about artificial intelligence. We need that. So I don't know why academics are afraid of artificial intelligence. I tell you guys, why are you afraid of it? Even the basic programming language we have, or even the basic statistical analysis program we have, there's some form of artificial intelligence in there. So what is new here? We should not be afraid. So we need then to embrace that technology and say, how then do we embrace that technology? For me, people who are debating about artificial intelligence, like say, debating about a mobile phone and say, no, we want to go to landlines. This is not the time for us to go back to landlines. We've already killed the landlines issue. We've got mobile phones and they're not going to die. Artificial intelligence is here to stay, and we need young generation. I was telling you one of the conversations, saying, if you're going to have a program that is cutting edge, then these programs should be incorporated in your disaster risk management and your hospitality programs. So we have actually, I think it's travel something. Where is it travel? What is this? Not travel and tourism, where you book travel.com or something. I think they're incorporating artificial intelligence now in there. So things are happening whilst we are sleeping. Things are happening. Lastly, there, disaster-induced human displacement and migration in Southern Africa has become a real security challenge. So when I'm not, actually, it's almost moving to crisis levels. We've got few more disasters in the region, then are going to hit crisis levels. So I think then what then do we need to do? So it's not like somebody's going it's not like dreaming that disasters are going to come. No. So for me, who is a Christian, I know the disasters are going to increase. Why? The Bible said so. So I don't need to go then and spend 100 years to say, are disasters going to increase or not? Because the Bible said so. So the disasters are going to increase, and that is given. This is why I'm seeing things happening in Morocco, things happening everywhere, because it was said, it was written. So then we know disasters are going to be there. What we need then to do is to be prepared for these disasters. Now I'm going to run down through some of these issues. Give me 5 minutes indicator when I'm about to reach 30 minutes.
About 60 minutes.
Okay, that's fine. That was not 30 minutes. Anyway, So I spoke about this as integrating disaster risk reduction in this global framework. We need to know about that. Then this is the multiplicity of disasters. I've spoken about that. That is the slide that you're going to read on your own. It's going to explain to you what you need to know. But then I want to dwell a bit on this slide. This slide is giving us the summary of what we call rapid events and slow onset. Slow onset, among slow onsets, sea level rise. We are going to have disasters associated with sea level rise. Then we're also going to have, like, on rapid or extreme, things like drought, things like floods, things like tornadoes, heat wave. All these are coming to us and you need to know. Now, just a bit of what headlines that are coming through the system now. You discover the drought in the Mid-Panama Canal, if you're following, you should have come through that. Take earthquake, you have come through that. Morocco is just recent. If you continue reading, you have heard about Johannesburg fires. 78 people lost their lives there. You have heard about Chinese summers. You have heard about Brazilian state rules in terms of floods. You have heard about the Greece wildfires. You have heard about 300 or so fires in Canada. You have heard about the nice fires, that was 2017. We have heard about the Ukraine war. We are living it now. These are disasters that are there. We have heard it's around Europe. And of course, who forgets COVID? Everybody on the mask in the government was the boss. Everybody on the mask. So this is just a map. We have published this work. You can read it in the books. These are lockdowns. Early lockdowns, somewhere there, you can see the red, like you can see where there were no partial, complete lockdown. All these things we know. So this is not the end. And one other disaster that is coming is this disaster about net zero transition by 2030, 2050. So what they are saying is, like, we need to move away from fossil fuels. You know, ESCOM, almost like 70% of power for ESCOM is coming from coal. And the word is saying we need to migrate from coal, whether we call it right sizing, downsizing, draw down, whatever terminology you use. The word is saying we need to leave coal. But there is a disaster brewing there. What is the disaster? We're going to have stranded assets and stranded human beings. Because now, this is the disaster that we're not talking about. We are used to these other disasters, but we have got a mega disaster that is coming. Stranded assets, towns going ghost towns, people, crime rates going to increase. Because what do you expect if you're going to shut in Mpumalanga? Because migrating from Go means we have to shut the entire province. So what happens when you shut down the entire province? You think people are going to die of hunger? No. They're going to migrate and they're going to start involved in all sorts of activities. So you've read about a cyclone Idai and how the death that happened, the migration, the movement that took place there in 2019. This is actually one of the farms. We went to this farm. It's in Chimanimani in Zimbabwe. This farm was hosting some of the top timber mills in the country. After Cyclone Idai, it was a flat ground. The tractors, the plant, the truck, the lorries all went. They were never found. And the human beings that were in the compounds. So this is actually how bad that disaster was. So maybe some of you have just heard, I visited that place. And the other epicenter was Copper. There, the entire settlement went with its contents. And when I say settlement, there are human beings there. It went, some of them, they just went to the sea. Some were buried in Mozambique. So these are some of the issues that I say we really need to say something about this now, okay? Then there's issue, Centurion Hotel. Maybe some of you have heard about Centurion Hotel. This hotel is closed now because all the water coming from Ekurhuleni flooding this hotel. And that is not the end, because there's chaos there in Ekurhuleni. People build as if there are no town planning laws. Who is from Ekurhuleni? Nobody wants to honor that. So all the water is going to come to Pretoria and things are going to be bad. And also tornadoes, Malawi, tornadoes in Mpumalanga, this you can read on your own. But I want to pause here as I close now, because I think my time is gone. the sea is advancing. This is Cape Town, and I tell you, the sea is coming. The sea is coming to the town. And the problem is, like, at times, the challenge we have now, this not an apartheid issue or Zimbabwean issue. What do you learn from Zimbabwe? You know, I need to be politically correct here. Remember, black governments say we must not say the white governments were okay in any form. But I'll stand before you and say the white governments, colonial governments, were right in one form, I know. Making sure that the resources are protected, natural resources, and that people put fire guards. Do you know you would go to prison for not putting contour regions? I don't know if some of you know what contours are. When you farm your land, you have to have contours for water to drain properly. When you've got a farm, you have to have a fire guard. You did not have to build on a waterway or on a floodplain or in a wetland. But independent governments, they say they find an opening there. They say, put RDP houses there. What a disaster. Then the following day, there is water follows where it follows. And you wake up the entire 100 households or what RDP houses are gone. And you want to blame RDP. You want to blame colonialism on that. You can't. This is just the utter political arrogance. But in disaster risk management, that arrogance must stop because people would die. It's a death trap. So let me go to the conclusion because some of the things I did not do because I was given limited time. Remember, I said it was a 1 hour presentation. I want just to conclude here by saying, as we're not talking about disaster coming to building resilience, we need now to look forward, building forward and building back better. So when we talk about building forward and building back better, this is actually what happened in Port St. John's. I think for those that are aware, there are some of the structures here in Port St. John's. I think the banks were involved, the government involved. In Zimbabwe also we're doing those stronger settlements, agriculture and what. But these things we need. We need to integrate Industry 4.0. We need to integrate other terminologies. Printing houses, this is a technology you can use. And it's happening now. Use of drones, use of IA, we need AI, we need this to be done. And of course, as I conclude, we say that when considering the pathways to scaling up disaster risk management and human security in Southern Africa, the bed is in your hands. You can either release it alive or you can release it dead. I think this is what I can do in the time that we can.
Thank you very much. Morning, colleagues. Good morning. My name is Udiliane from University of Botswana, and this is a paper that I wrote with Dr. Stanley and Dr. Rhodes. So the paper is titled Learning Organization as an Emergency Response by Administrators of Learning Institutions in the Wake of COVID-19 Pandemic in Botswana. So that's the structure of the paper. I'll give you the introduction, then definition of a learning organization, methodology, a brief presentation of business during COVID-19, then discussion on how learning organization can be a solution during a crisis, then tenets of a learning organization, then what is single loop and double loop learning, and how to design a learning organization, then the conclusion. As other presenters have already shared with us, COVID-19 pandemic has no doubt reshaped ways of doing business in organizations, and organizations faced challenges during COVID-19. Some organizations had to close down. They lost employees. People were subjected to isolations and all that. And one of the common things that we saw during COVID-19 was that people were forced to work remotely, something which was foreign to most organizations. It was something that was new to almost all organizations. So the pandemic, yes, forced people to work remotely. So the paper introduces learning organization for organizations to stay in control of their business during a crisis like that of COVID-19. And we're just saying that taking into cognizance the tenets of learning organization can help organizations survive during a crisis. And what is a learning organization? Learning organization is also referred to as a learning community, a learning institution, or a learning company. So a learning organization is an organization that promotes continuous learning, innovation, and adaptation at all levels, from individual employees, teams, groups, and the entire organization. So it's basically about collective learning within an organization. It is also an organization that continually expands its capacity to learn, adapt, and change by creating and sharing knowledge. It is characterized by a culture of inquiry and pursuit of knowledge. It is an organization where learning becomes part of the practices and processes of the organization. Learning organizations are important because they are capable of their own transformation and renewal. Such organizations continuously learn from their experiences and use the learning to improve their performance, to improve their procedures and their processes within the organization. It helps organizations to maintain a competitive advantage because the organization has learned how to be adaptable and flexible to the changing things around them. So learning organization can be suggested as a potential answer to survive during a crisis. According to Agris and Scone, 1978, to survive in an organization, we need to develop organizations that are learning organizations or learning systems or learning companies. This is because learning systems are capable of their own transformation and renewal, like I had indicated. So the methodology that was used in this paper is basically a desktop research. We consulted different books and journals to inform this study. And business during COVID-19. Just like the rest of the world, Botswana was hard hit by COVID-19. It wasn't an exception. And to mitigate the spread of COVID-19, the government, not management, the government had to introduce different measures to mitigate the spread of COVID-19. There was a state of public emergency starting the 2nd of April, 2022, which got lifted in May 2022. And during this period, according to UNESCO, lockdown hindered access to schools and teachers. Learning institutions had to find ways of surviving during this period, and they had to be a shift from the conventional ways of teaching to what we call e-learning. And during that period, there was no teaching going on in many institutions, and University of Botswana was not an exception. The university had to close 2 times in the year 2020 between March and August. And it is important to note that though university is a learning institution, one would expect that it will be ready to utilize e-learning. One would realize that the university was closed during that period, and there was no teaching going on during that period. And according to Udirile, the general administration of UB was disrupted, including delayed supplementary examination and admission process. And like I said, despite UB being a learning institution, both students and instructors had not been adequately prepared for online teaching and learning environment. And this is confirmed by Mtwarang that when the COVID-19 hit the world, UB academic staff were still undergoing training to learn the different methods and tools associated with e-learning. And the transition has been a challenge because there is less motivation to forgo traditional methods of teaching from the academic staff. And the university has long introduced e-learning, but the uptake of e-learning has been very slow, and the instructors are not attending the training that have been organized for them. And that is also noted by Taylor 2007 that instructors are not attending the e-learning training. They prefer traditional methods. And I think this is common in most universities that, instructors prefer the traditional methods of teaching as opposed to virtual or e-learning. So from the foregoing, it is apparent that there is no collective sense making and continuous improvement. There is no learning as a collective within organizations. And as such, organizations do fail to adapt and survive during a crisis because they have not learned as a collective. So members of organizations are not embracing organizational learning, which is about learning, unlearning, and relearning. So UB responded to COVID-19 in numerous ways. And according to this concept of single loop learning, you realize that the measures that were introduced by UB were short-lived. This include, among others, establishing UB counseling centers, surveillance interests at UB gates, and wearing of masks. And like I said, all these measures can be said to be short-lived and can be equated to what we call single loop learning. And we are arguing that the university must establish a long-term measure that will enable the organization's own transformation, improvement, renewal, survival, and adaptability during a crisis. They should establish organizations that have learned how to learn, which is a learning organization. The transition requires learning, unlearning, and relearning, which is a challenge for most people. And according to Teller 2007, this requires organizational members to have a positive attitude to accommodate new methods of learning. In a situation where organizational members are not willing to learn and unlearn, to drop wisdom to gain wisdom, designing learning organizations become a challenge. This is to say that organizational members are usually stuck with old ways of doing things, conventional ways of doing things. They are stuck with traditional ways of teaching in universities. When you bring in issues of virtual learning or e-learning, it becomes a challenge to them. They fail to drop that which they have learned in order to make room for new things. And in this case, e-learning. And you realize that by the end of COVID-19, most lecturers or most instructors reverted back to their traditional ways of teaching. So according to Teller 2007, they found that compared to students, they found that compared to professionals, students have an upper hand in terms of using new technology of learning, like e-learning, because they are adventurous and they are motivated to learn. How learning organization can be a solution. According to Crossan 2003, organizational managers used to say that they hired a hand, but in today's world, we say organizations say they hired minds. Hence, in a world where minds are hired, learning becomes pertinent. It is important to appreciate that learning is a cumbersome and time-consuming process, hence the slow uptake of organizational learning. Learning on its own is quite a difficult exercise, and most people, organizations, it's something that they fail to learn. They haven't learned how to learn. And for you to say that you've learned how to learn is that you have to learn, relearn, and unlearn. Sorry, you have to learn, unlearn, and relearn. So this was noted by Doxon that learning is an expensive exercise that requires hefty investment. And this is more cumbersome for the educated, for the professionals, because they've never experienced failure in their lives. So because they've never experienced failure in their lives, they've always experienced success. They engage in what we call defensive reasoning as opposed to effective reasoning. So they do this to avoid shame and guilt. So Doxon 1993 points out that although learning is a cumbersome exercise, it is important to appreciate the benefits that comes along with a learning organization. And to survive, the benefits can allow organizations to survive in turbulent and tough business environments like COVID-19 pandemic. So a learning organization can be an effective solution for organizations to cope with the challenges posed by COVID-19 pandemic. And below are the tenets of a learning organization. There is collective sense-making and continuous improvement. Learning organization emphasize multi-level learning, hence it leaves no one behind. You learn as a collective, such that when you go through a crisis, you can tap into the brain power of the organization. It promotes collaborative and inclusive culture where employees are encouraged to share their knowledge, expertise, and insight. And during times of uncertainties, organizations can respond as a collective because they have learned as a collective. It also entails effective reasoning, like I said, as opposed to defensive reasoning. According to Agrees 1999, learning is a challenge for professionals because their success makes learning cumbersome. They have never experienced failure, so they are just stuck to the known things. They are just stuck with single loop learning. So professionals dwell on single loop learning as opposed to double loop learning. And when the single loop fails, they get completely shattered and resort to blame games, that they are not part of the problem that is before them. So single loop learning occurs when actions lead to consequences. What is single loop learning and double loop learning? Single loop learning occurs when actions lead to consequences, and if consequences are not those desired, then actions are changed and the processes continue. So with single loop learning, you basically just scratch the surface. You don't dig deeper to find what could be the reasons behind what is happening on the ground. So single loop learning works well for professionals because they keep private their premises, inferences, and conclusions that shape their behavior and avoid testing them in a truly independent and objective fashion. That's by Agrees 1991. Therefore, single loop learning is short-lived. It is useful for routine, repetitive issues and for getting the job done without questioning and examining the system in place. For example, the systems that were put in place by University of Botswana during COVID-19, they were just short-lived. It was just to mitigate the situation at hand, not necessarily to try to learn from the experience, then to say, if we were to encounter the same in future, what is it that we should do? That's now double loop learning. So with double loop learning, it occurs when mistakes are corrected by first examining and altering the underlying system and then changing the actions. The underlying system could be the type of thinking and reasoning, which could either be productive or defensive reasoning. And though double loop learning is more valuable and insightful, this type of learning has proved to be the most difficult, and most professionals, instructors included, they shy away from it. So organizational leaders usually do not engage in productive reasoning to learn and appreciate that they are part of the problem at hand. For example, when the university closed and there was no teaching going on during that period, the instructors blamed the students that they are not forthcoming in terms of utilizing virtual platforms or e-learning. They did not appreciate that they are part of the problem of what is happening on the ground. So when such happens, organizational leaders and professionals go about blaming and bad-mouthing others, or even blaming students, not realizing that they are part of the problem at hand. So agreeers recommend double loop, which is not simply about how people feel, but about how people think and reason. Organizational leaders have to appreciate that they are partly to blame for the problems they encounter. And the slow uptake and failure of the use of technology for online teaching should not only be blamed on students. The organizational leaders and instructors are partly to blame because they never designed and embraced learning organization. They never looked at the fact that something like a crisis would affect them. Let me just move to the last slide of how to design learning organization. So the first step in designing a learning organization, like I said, organizations have to learn how to learn, and this is done through double loop learning, like I had mentioned. This is a comprehensive and turnaround learning that does inquiry into the learning system and develop the capability of the organization. Then the second one, I just gave examples of how universities can go about in designing learning organizations. Then the second one is to embrace the aspects of organizational learning, which is individual learning, unlearning, and relearning. Then the third one is to create a conducive environment for learning. A learning organization creates structures and strategies to facilitate the learning of the organizational members. And this is to say the organizational managers should create a conducive environment for learning. They should not come up with structures that stifle learning within organizations. And okay, I can see the chairs already standing up to hint that at this time up. So in conclusion, basically, the COVID-19 has presented significant challenges to organizations, but has also presented an opportunity for organizations to embrace the concept of a learning organization. By creating a culture of learning and collaboration, organizations can quickly adapt to the changing environment and improve their performance. And by analyzing their experiences, failures, and learning from them, Through productive reasoning as opposed to defensive reasoning, organizations can improve their routines and patterns of behavior, thus enhancing their ability to cope with tough business environment and challenges presented by a crisis. So basically, with a learning organization, you live in a future that does not exist. You are ready for what is coming. You are way much ahead of others. So if organizations are to build learning organizations, then they build brain power for the organizations that they can easily tap into when confronted by a crisis. Thank you, Chair.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think I've learned a lesson, and that is that computer technology and AI that they were talking about is for the younger generation. At home, they've got a saying, they say, which basically means these white people things can embarrass you at times. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize on behalf of my colleague Sonwabo Namba, who's actually the expert in Sendai. He's just qualified and done his master's at Northwest University. But because of work pressure with our fire season in the Northwest Province, it seems as if you're going to be having to put up with me for a few more lectures. So I apologize if I'm going to put anybody to sleep. However, let's get into it. Sendai is a place in Japan. So what do the important people do? They name conventions and contracts and reports after places where it was drawn up. And I think this is done to try and impress us plebs on the ground, because we've never heard of Sendai, so it's like, wow. Now, this comes and affects us as a community in the Northwest Province, and I'm talking on behalf of my province, and unashamedly so, because I'm supposed to be representing 4 million people. When you look at this graph, you'll see the pink one has got a tummy at the top, and it seems as if the blue one has got a bit of an empty tummy at the bottom. Now, when you first look at this and you're looking at a weather chart, you think to yourself, okay, the temperature went up, and here the humidity went down. How does that affect us? And please remember, my background is now in firefighting, and this is what is known as the crossover phenomenon. When the temperature and the humidity reach a point where they touch, and the humidity or the relative humidity goes below the temperature, that is where we in firefighting start panicking. And this is what's happening in Canada at the moment. You'll find a lot of this happening. It is not something to which we are very accustomed in the Northwest Province, but lately we see it happening more and more. Now, if you look, it seems as if there's a perfect correlation between that and this. And now you look here and you see that the minimum is 19 and the maximum is 29. And the higher the difference between the two, the greater the risk. Now, why am I mentioning this? And as we go through the presentation, you'll realize that there's a correlation between whether people being resilient or being prepared. And as I said in our previous presentation, bless you. As I said in our previous presentation, we as a community are not prepared because our governments are not putting us in a position to be prepared. We are being failed by government. Every year, disasters disrupt the lives of millions. This is not a question. This is a statement of fact. And more we see the enormity of the disaster becoming something that we as humanity just accept. In the beginning, when there was a disaster, it was, oh, wow, there's a disaster. Now it's happening. So it's a question of, okay, they've had an earthquake or they've had a flood. So what? We are getting accustomed to this. That scares me. Is there a way to reduce the impact of the disaster? It's a question. And you're looking at me as if I'm supposed to give the answer. Just after our, or just before the tea break, some of the students came and engaged with us and asked me questions. And I said to them, if you can answer, I'll take you out to dinner at the restaurant of your choice. They were asking me questions to which I don't have answers. And I don't think we have an answer for this either. But we have a solution or a proposed solution. There's a difference between the two. In our province, we've come up with something which we call a community resilience officer program. It's something that we're busy developing, and we are taking it to the poorest of the poor. We're taking it to the richest of the rich. We are taking it to tribal authorities because we represent all 56 tribal authorities in our province and the Khoisan leaders. We're representing the disabled, the aged, the youth. And what are we coming up with? We're coming up with a program where we'd like to teach everybody in our province not to be dependent on government, not to be dependent on handouts, not to be dependent on somebody else for your well-being. I remember when I was growing up that if you had a problem, you could go to Auntie Mang Mang, or you could go to somebody else if you had a problem as a child in the community. Today, if you go to somebody else, they look at you and give you a really dirty look because you can't go knock on a stranger's door because they may arrest you for trespassing or they may want to shoot you if I look at what's happening in the US. But what is scary is we don't have that sense of being. We don't have that sense of community anymore. In South Africa, we tried to formalize it and called it Ubuntu. And every government department stuck it up in the wall. And it would say, the policy of Ubuntu is the following. Look out for your neighbor, treat people with respect, do the following. But since when is respect something that you can enforce? Since when is being able to look out for your neighbor? The good professor was talking about the good book telling us things. We were raised, all of us, it doesn't matter what your religion is, but the same tenet is the same. Love thy neighbor, do unto others, Ubuntu, whether it's in Hinduism or in Christianity, across the spectrum, people have always looked out for your neighbor and for your community. We, however, somewhere in modern society, I don't know if it's called wokeism or anything else, I'm not being judgmental here. I'm not being a politician. I'm a social scientist when I say this. But we've lost the sense of being. We've lost the sense of caring. You heard the good professor saying that you used to have to make a contour in your lands. Somebody's lost this. Where is it now? When we drove here, Suna and I were actually looking at the contours from the airport here on the left-hand side. We actually saw them planting. And it was quite strange to us because where I come from, people don't do it anymore. And here they are doing it. You start thinking to yourself, but where is it? Now, how do I link all these things to the Sendai Sustainable Development Goals? And if you have to go and look at where we come from, and I'm going to use an example which I really like using. In the Tswana culture, and I was raised by a Tswana lady, so that's my home culture. If you eat 3 fruits, the first pip you can swallow, the second pip you can swallow, the third pip, you have to spit it out for your forefathers. In other words, for your ancestors. But it's got nothing to do with ancestors. It's got to do with environmental management and sustainable development goals. So you'll see in a lot of the Tswana areas, you'll see trees growing on the side of the road. And you'll think to yourself, gee, did somebody plant this or did they not cut it? But it would be because of the children or the people walking along the road and spitting out every third pip. It was to make sure there's a sustainability in the environment. People years ago were environmentalists. As the good professor said, we've lost this. I actually sat in, I started changing my presentation when I heard the professor talking, because this touched me to the soul as an environmentalist. When you go and look at the framework for disaster risk reduction, and you think to yourself, the people sitting in the offices, have they ever been to a fire? Have they ever felt the flame on their face? Have they ever had their eyelids and their eyebrows burnt and their beard singed? We interviewed a lady for a position. I was on the panel, and one of the senior managers in the department, when she was asked, have you ever been on a fire line? She said, no, but I've seen it on TV. And I did not approve her appointment, but guess what? She got the job. Why? Because she was a woman, and they had to fill a certain number of gender-based positions. As far as I'm concerned, whether it's in Stenden or anything else, if the best man for the job is a woman, then you appoint the woman. Man does not refer to gender, it refers to manus in Latin. It's like chairman, and everybody's saying chair lady or chairperson. It's not correct. It's a chairman. It refers to the manus, the person who holds the gavel. And we must stop panicking now about being politically correct, and we must do the right thing. When you go and look now at Sendai, I'm wondering how many of the people who sit there have actually been to a flood, have actually taken the trouble to climb into a sinkhole to go and rescue a puppy or a dog or a human being out of a sinkhole. Or are they sitting there and telling us, as the practitioners, what to do without ever having been there? This, to me, is a major problem. How do we effectively reduce the devastating impact of disasters? I think for me and for our team, it's commitment. You've got to be committed. As I was telling the students, who determines when you have breakfast when you're on a fire line? And I'd like somebody to tell me here, except the ones that I told. Does somebody, would somebody like to give me an answer? Let me ask our American guest. Who determines when you have breakfast when you're on a fire line? Do you know? Fire. The fire. Not the time, not your boss, not your supervisor, the fire. You will not believe how many times a fire has run away or a fire break has run away. Because somebody says, we're going to have breakfast now. And this, to me, is our problem. When you look at disaster risk reduction and you look at the systematic and comprehensive approach that we're supposed to have, are we really prepared? Are we really doing the disaster risk reduction part, or are we being reactive? I don't think we're even being reactive properly in South Africa, in my opinion, in my province, because when we applied or requested them to declare a disaster when we lost 738,303 hectares to the estimated loss of 4.5 billion in 2021. I'm still waiting for an official reply from government to tell us whether in 2021 they're going to declare a state of disaster. They didn't do it. Last year we lost about 500,000, and still they never declared the state of disaster. It gets done down the line when the paperwork says so. We don't have that immediate sense of urgency in declaring a state of disaster. When you look at disaster risk reduction and you bring it into Sendai with the Sustainable Development Goals, are we really applying it? Or is it a theoretical exercise where you check tick boxes? Because if you don't check the tick boxes, you're not going to get your funding, you're not going to get your budget, you're going to be brought in front of a portfolio oversight committee. We've got to understand the risks. We've got to prevent the risks. They talk about R1 or $1 spent in prevention is better than 15 in aftercare or rehabilitation. I think it's becoming a lot more than that. When you look at disasters, I think this basically tells you everything that you have to know. I don't have to go and tell you there are 18 goals and there are 4 of these and 5 of those, and of the 18, 10 of them apply to fire management. Not necessary, because are we here just for fire? But there's a flood, there's a drought, there's a sinkhole. All of these are interlinked. When you look at the promotion of resilience, the reduction of human and economic losses, remember food security, livelihoods are part of human losses. How many people commit suicide, go on to drugs? You have gender-based violence because of this. There's a big link if you look at the socioeconomic problems together with the environmental problems that you have. When you safeguard the environment, are you being inclusive if you bring in women, children, disabled, and traditional leaders? Or, as we have in our province, if you're a white farmer, you can't use state resources to go and protect them against fires in the area. So if we have a white farm here and a black-owned farm here and a white-owned farm here, I can't prevent the fire from going from the white-owned farm to the black-owned farm. I've got to wait for the fire to get here and then I can go and fight. That's what they're telling you. And I want to know since when did Sendai or anybody else tell us that fires respect women, gender, age, color, etc.
I think we are running out of time, okay?
I've got my summary page. I'm finished. I am watching the time. The Sendai development goals are significant because they provide the framework. But frameworks on their own mean absolutely nothing unless we can implement. We've got to integrate the framework with the theory with the practical. But sometimes I believe people start at the wrong end. They come up with a theory and the paperwork and everything else, and they tell us why it can't be done. They don't say, here's the problem, this is what we've got to do to make it happen. And finally, we've got to understand the disaster. We've got to realize the people who we are working with, are they vulnerable? Can they manage it? It's very good to say you've got to go and do a go bag, or you've got to do an emergency package of food. But can the person even afford a loaf of bread tonight? Now you're telling him to put water away and tinned food and dried food. How do we build the resilience? We've got to start with educating our children. And if we don't educate our children, we're going to have another lost generation. So we've got to be prepared, we've got to respond, and we've got to know how to recover out of this situation. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
We also sit with numerous examples of conflicts as well as problems that hamper these attempts to fight fires. The main role players for firefighting in the Northwest Province are the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, the Fire Brigade Services, the Fire Protection Associations, the Department of Forestry, Fishery and the Environment, as well as the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development. The Northwest Province is plagued by a lack of equipment, a lack of resources, and a lack of training when it comes to organizational and official firefighting. And this role has been mainly taken on by the Fire Protection Associations with assistance from the Department of Forestry, Fishery and the Environment. The Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, known as COGTA, is supposed to be the main role player when it comes to interdepartmental cooperation and the management and coordination of resources. Our fire brigade services are severely understaffed and underfunded and lack the resources needed to prevent fires and field fires effectively. The fire protection associations therefore step in, assist on a volunteer basis with their own resources where they can. However, we are reaching a point where these volunteers can no longer assist as it has become too costly, too dangerous, or just too much conflict from other organizations, with a lack of support from the departments who are supposed to be responsible for firefighting and for fires in the province. It has been a great struggle and a long struggle to get these departments actively involved to perform their functions and duties as required. As mentioned, COGTA's role is to manage the relationship between national government, the provincial government, and municipalities, as well as overseeing traditional leadership. When it comes to firefighting, their key role is in the running of disaster management centers. These disaster management centers, however, only assist once a disaster has been declared. However, they are reluctant to do so, either due to an unwillingness to take the responsibility or to shoulder the costs or to be the person responsible for the problems that have arisen. Historically, they have come back to us and said, but the situation is not a disaster, when we sit with the legal definition for a disaster as such. A disaster means a progressive or sudden or widespread or localized natural or human-caused occurrence which causes or threatens to cause death, injury, and disease, damage to property, infrastructures, or the environment, as well as a disruption of the life of the community and its ability to effectively use its own resources. Despite 3 consecutive years, which in terms of the definition would constitute a disaster, disaster management centers have remained uncooperative and unresponsive. They refuse to declare disasters and they refuse to provide assistance on any significant level. Recently, however, the Department of Forestry, Fishery and the Environment has stepped up and have started taking some of the responsibility. They have started providing resources and some training along with DARD to volunteers and to firefighters to assist in the combatant of veld fires. However, this still remains insufficient and it leaves our volunteers and our fire services ill-equipped. In light of all this, our traditional councils and local authorities have started voicing their concerns and have started putting political pressure on our different departments to force them to get involved. This has assisted the FPAs to perform their volunteer duties more efficiently and to start cooperating with the different departments involved. The aforementioned disaster management centers function on 4 different levels. However, the main ones of our concern are the provincial disaster management centers, district, and municipal. And as per the Act, disaster management means a continuous and integrated multi-sectoral, multidisciplinary process of planning and implementation of measures aimed at preventing, mitigating, emergency preparedness, response to disasters, and the recovery after a disaster. However, disaster management centers still refuse to get involved in anything except active fires or active disasters when it has become a public matter. The main source of this conflict is a lack of funding. Per legislation, all state departments are supposed to have a contingency fee in place for the combatant of disasters. However, this is not enforced and it is in no way penalized when not enforced. The responsibility once again comes back to an ill-equipped fire brigade service and to volunteers to combat fires. The Department of Forestry, Fishery and Environment have created an extended public works program known as Working on Fire to assist with combat of veld fires. However, even these teams remain ill-equipped due to a lack of resources from insufficient planning and training. While these teams are trained in firefighting, they are not always trained in how to cooperate and coordinate with other agencies or with resources from different departments within their agency. This has led to exacerbated fire circumstances where the fire remains out of control until additional resources have been allocated or made available. Historically, however, the disaster management centers have made training available and have made resources available for volunteers and for the FPA to assist in combating veld fires. However, due to political shifts, this is no longer the case. These disaster management centers, especially on a provincial level, remain uncooperative and refuse to assist where needed. It has become a matter of, we don't think it is a disaster, therefore we will not be doing anything about it. You do what you can do, and that's it. The volunteers and landowners and traditional councils in the areas have become tired, they've become ill-equipped, and they have just started giving up hope. However, they still actively maintain an attitude of doing what they can to prevent fires and to assist their communities. The lack of funding has further led to problems of undertrained officials, ill-equipped fire brigade services, and volunteers who have received losses to property and outstripping of resources due to no longer having resources. Once a volunteer's equipment has been damaged, they receive no support or no help to repair the equipment to allow them to fight fires in the future. As you can see, these are some of the statistics for the last 3 fire seasons in which we have had severe fires. Despite these numbers, disaster management has been unwilling to declare disaster despite exorbitant damage, insufficient resources, no disaster plan in place, and economic loss debilitating the agricultural sector. Once again, they are only willing to declare disaster once it has become a public matter and the publicity would make them look bad if they did not do something about it. The Department for Forestry, Fishery and the Environment, as well as the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, along with the FPA, have been attempting to mitigate this disaster in and of itself by providing resources, training, and creating their own disaster plan. However, even with the intent to cooperate between the 3 agencies, there still remains conflict between the different agencies and different departments, as it is not always clear who is responsible on a ground level, even though legislation is in place to ensure that the roles, responsibilities, and duties of different departments is clearly set out. This matter stems mainly from a lack of training and a lack of knowledge from different officials in these departments when it comes to firefighting, as I will further explain a bit later in my presentation. One of the primary ways in which legislation allows for the cooperation between different agencies and departments is through the Veld and Forest Fire Act, Act number 101 of 1998. This act has allowed for the creation of fire protection associations to assist in combating veld fires, and in Section 6 of the Act, it creates the role of a fire protection officer. The fire protection officer's main duty is to coordinate on fires by taking charge and ensuring that all resources are effectively used and utilized. The fire protection officer is usually made up of fire brigade services officers, namely their chief fire officer. However, when it comes to district FPAs and provincial FPAs where there is no chief fire officer from a fire brigade service, this person is normally elected. The FPO is then responsible for taking control of any fire within their jurisdiction, as well as enforcing the rules and regulations and laws in regards to veld fires. They are also responsible for the training of members, as well as to ensure that other departments receive adequate training when it comes to fires. However, the fire protection officer still receives resistance from other departments who are claiming that they are not responsible for fires because it does not fall under their purview. A chief example of this would be the traffic department, as well as state-owned enterprises or government departments who own land in an area but refuse to become members of an FPA, despite being required to do so by law. As mentioned previously, fires in the Northwest Province have got many stakeholders. That is the Department of Forestry, Fishery and the Environment, COCTA, Working on Fire, Fire Protection Associations, Fire Services, non-FPA volunteers, landowners, traditional councils, and authorities. It is often the case that one or more groups from these agencies are involved on a fire. However, there is a severe lack of cooperation most of the time, if there is no clear command structure. Working on Fire, the previously mentioned Extended Public Works Program, is sponsored by the Department of Forestry, Fishery and the Environment, and they have allocated certain resources to assist in combating veld fires. However, for the majority of these stakeholders, they are only willing to take on a limited responsibility while avoiding any responsibility they feel falls under a different department. Certain policies and bylaws further make this difficult for these agencies to cooperate and to assist each other when it comes to veld fires. The main examples of this interorganizational conflict are the shifting of responsibility, where an organization feels that they are not responsible for this specific duty, such as ensuring that all landowners make fire breaks or take other measures to prevent fires from spreading from their own property or to their own property. As mentioned, a refusal to cooperate, where the traffic department feels that failed fires are not under their purview and they do not dispatch any units to assist when a fire creates dangerous road conditions. These road conditions have led to loss of life, damage to vehicles, and damage to property, where they have been requested to assist in controlling the traffic around the fire. As often is the case, we will have ground teams on the fire, on the ground, who have to move across the road. If there is no traffic department, there is no traffic control, and we run the risk of having our volunteers being hit by a car. Political backbiting has often led to officials refusing to assist because they are too scared of the consequences, because they might step on the toes of a superior or of someone within their organization who has got their own agenda. Furthermore, there is always the question of who is going to pay for this. When activating resources, who's going to pay for the costs of these resources? Who's going to ensure that all costs are covered? The departments do not have the funding available to them that they require due to no contingency fees being put in place and no adequate planning being made for the disasters. Furthermore, there is a reluctance to shoulder the cost because they are afraid of the misallocation or the misuse of funds. And then this also stems from a lack of practical and theoretical training when it comes to fires and disaster management. Officials who have been in charge or been put in charge do not have the knowledge required to effectively combat the fires or to activate resources as required. Ladies and gentlemen, disasters are colorblind and citizens of no nation. It is imperative that we cooperate and assist each other. We need to all be speaking the same language and walking the same path. By ensuring that everyone has the training needed to do this, we will cut down on our dangers of fires. A good example of this is a fire that occurred on 24 August 2023 in the Blansburg area, where we had 4 different agencies active on a fire with no communication between the agencies until NUFPA dispatched a IC team, that is an incident command team, to coordinate the different resources. Once the IC team started coordinating, the effect the agencies had on the fire was exponentially better, and we managed to put out the fire instead of it having a drawn-out matter. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Once again, ladies and gentlemen, good morning from the Northwest Umbrella Fire Protection Association team. But this time we are being supported by Prof. Roman, and it's a great honor to be able to have this type of support. When we came up with the topic, the potential of international disputes between Botswana and South Africa triggered by cross-border fires, I think many people thought I was being a little bit irresponsible, but we've been trying to get a relationship or a MOU in place for a standard operating procedure to be enforced between us and the Republic of Botswana for quite some time. When we started the Umbrella Fire Protection Association many years ago, it was one of our targets to try and get it done. But unfortunately, once again, our government has failed us. We were told that they're busy with Lesotho, Swaziland, Mozambique, Namibia, and soon we will be talking to Botswana, that they actually are now talking about it at SADC level. But it leaves me with one question. We have fires happening now, ladies and gentlemen. This picture was 11 September at 23 minutes past midnight this morning. If you have a look, there's one fire, there's one fire, there's one fire, and these are on their way. It's not something that is pie in the sky. That is actual. Now I'm going to tell you what we do in the Northwest Province. But it's a secret, it's just between us. So you don't tell anyone. I have told people to cut the fence and go into Botswana and go and put out the fires. Totally illegal, but I'm prepared to accept the responsibility. I'd like to see who's going to arrest me for saving lives, livelihoods, and food security and the environment. Because I think it will put us on the international platform to say that somebody has failed us. There's no other way to say it, but it's a disgrace that governments are putting their citizens at risk. And I'm not talking about Botswana, I'm talking our government. Our democratically elected government in this country is not doing what they're supposed to. If you look at the following, it's not only fires on the Botswana side. Now, these are the burn scars from 15 November to 16 December 2022. Look at how many fires there were. Then we have on the Northern Cape, on the Free State, on Gauteng, and Limpopo as well. So we're at risk. And what do we do about it? Sit back and accept it? No. We have decided to do something about it, and that's why we are represented here today. Because we are hoping that this international community will be able to make sure that our cries are heard. In Setswana, there's a saying, they say, "Ngwana o saling o swela tharing." It basically means that the child who does not cry when he is being, that would be for the Eastern Cape. It basically means the child who does not cry will not be put to the breast. You're not going to eat, you're going to die. So what are we doing? We're making sure that we can be heard. And it's not a Tswana saying, it's not a Xhosa saying, it's not an English saying, it's a human saying. I'm sure in Shona you'd have a similar one. I'm sure you'd have it in Chichewa, in any other language. It's there. Now, Madam Chair, I apologize, but I've got 60 slides to show you, so I'll be here for quite some time. But these 60 slides are going to be shown in 1 second per slide. And here we go. Please watch the fires coming in and going to Botswana. There, watch. Crossing the border. Watch in the Kalahari Frontier Park coming into the Northern Cape. Ladies and gents, it's the fastest 60 slides I've ever presented. But I think it gives you an idea of our concern. I took that actual from last year's fires. We're busy compiling it for this year's fires, but what I've decided to do is not to do just 2 months for this year. I'm going to try and do it now for 2 years at a second slide to see if there's any correlation. But what we do realize is in Botswana, and this I can't prove, but we were told that the Khoisan or the Bushmen set the veld on fire as well, so that it's easier to hunt. Sorry? Yeah. In Tswana, they talk about Basarwa. In South Africa, we talk of Khoisan. There are many terms. Some are considered to be rude, others, it depends on where you come from. In the Northwest, you'll see there's a lot of people who look very similar to the Khoisan, where there's been intermarriage between the Botswana in the Northwest and also the communities in Botswana. But remember one thing, that border that was drawn there was Queen Victoria and her friends sitting around a table with a couple of glasses of wine or gin, and they decided this line here, that's mine, this line here, that's yours. We've got communities staying in the Northwest province, but their family is staying in Botswana. So that is not a geographically or a culturally defined line. It was determined by colonialists many years ago, and it's putting us at risk. It's putting our communities at risk. And this is when I mentioned earlier, these are our municipalities here that are at risk. When you go to a fire and you're in charge, And the next morning you open your eyes after having slept for 2 hours, or you've been on the fire line for 48 hours. And this is what's presented to you. It's not nice. Have you ever smelt burnt flesh? It's nothing like a braai. It's nothing like a barbecue. This is heart-wrenching. We've had a case where we lost 299,000 hectares in one day, 23 August 2011. And I've been warning for the last 2 years, 3 years, the big one is coming. The people thought I'm mad. And guess what, ladies and gentlemen? It came this year. We've had people losing many, many cattle. Our official number gets put out to the people, the WhatsApp, and I manage it on behalf of our organization. But when an old lady of deep in her 70s phones you and says her son has died of COVID, her daughter-in-law had died of AIDS, and she's looking after the grandchildren, and she took her late husband's money, pension money, and the little bit she earned, and she put it into goats and cattle so that she could look after the grandchildren. She cries and says to me, I'm standing here watching my children, my grandchildren's future going up in smoke. Please come and help me. And I can do nothing to assist her. I don't know how to explain to you the stress of that on my team and on myself. You sit with tears in your eyes when you hear the person crying and screaming for help, or having somebody, the neighbor, being burnt, trying to rescue the animals. It's not fun, ladies and gentlemen. Now, if you look at the bottom, what does the Disaster Management Act say in the preamble? To prevent or reduce the risk of disasters. Does this link in with Sendai? Does this link in with why we are here as emergency managers? But why can't we do it if it's in the Act? We are compelled, it's a statutory requirement to prevent or reduce. Does it mean that our politicians do not apply their own laws, or are they above it? It applies to us as the guys on the ground, but the politicians don't have to apply it because they stay in Pretoria, they stay in Cape Town, wherever in the world they stay, and they're not affected. Till the day that a politician's mother, son, daughter, grandchild is burnt, is drowned, is killed in a motor accident, we will not have the support or the assistance that we as citizens are entitled to have. I think politicians and officials forget that they are servants of the people. And unfortunately, they don't act that way. They act as if we owe them something. They act as if they are above the law. Ladies and gents, this was yesterday, and this is today. Red is extreme. Orange is very dangerous. Blue is not a problem, and green is very low. Yellow is dangerous, but fires can be made or fire breaks can be made. And if you look at this once again, watch how the line is drawn at provincial levels or at provincial boundaries. I want to know who came up with the idea that wind adheres to provincial geopolitical boundaries. I don't understand it. I'll be standing at my farm trying to make my own fire break. And the weather station, the only one to which we have access in the province, is in Potchefstroom, 20 kilometers away from me. And they tell me I can't make a fire break because the wind is too strong. The fire danger index is high. And I'm standing with a full crew, 7 to 15 units and people, trained, qualified, equipped to make the fire break. And we get told we can't make it because the FDI is too high. How? Something is wrong with the theory. The theory and the practical are not coming together. This is why I think it's important, especially with our students sitting here. And I met an interesting young man who is very interested in GIS. So I want to say to you, your work is cut out. This is where we need your young minds where we need AI and people to assist us. Because if we can improve this, I think it'll help or go a big way to helping our communities. Ladies and gentlemen, that's South Africa, that's Botswana on one farm. Not all, not the whole 400-kilometer odd border in my province. And I'm not talking for the whole country, I'm talking my province. What does the farmer say here? He writes this to me. And this was written in response to a departmental official telling our members on an official WhatsApp platform that the government will not assist to fight fires on white farms. I never knew there was a thing called a white farm and a black farm. I knew there's a farm and I knew there's a fire and I know there's a fire break and I know there's not a fire break. So what does this guy do? He's now the chairman of the FPA, the Fire Protection Association in that area, in the municipal area. But because our volunteers are now being treated this way, he's now saying, you know what? Me and my members and I will no longer go and fight for fires in rural communities on tribal land or on state land. We'll allow them to burn. It's taken us 3 years to develop the relationship, to pool our resources so that we can protect the community. And one official in one department with one letter, totally unfounded, goes and destroys that relationship. Cannot be, but it is. Ladies and gentlemen, when you look at this again, and the GIS young man over there, I'm going to say to you, the field is there. The world is your oyster. We need the young minds to assist us with this. We're a bunch of volunteers trying to protect the community. And this is beyond the Northwest Province. We have been requested by the Northern Cape to assist them. And I'm sure if we can come up with a copy and paste, a system or a solution that would work, we'd be able to use it in the rest of the country, in SADC, and maybe even in other countries. I'm not saying that we are good. I'm not saying we are the best. What I am saying is at the moment, we're the only resource that our province has. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Why this topic? Why this title? Climate change remains one of the greatest environmental and social, as well as economic threat that is facing developing countries. It has significant international and intergenerational implications, and these threaten equity and sustainable development. That is why developing countries need to urgently devise ways to mitigate and adapt to climate change, as they are most vulnerable to its very negative impacts. I'm on slide 4. In Botswana, climate change is projected to increase the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events such as heat waves, droughts, and floods, which may lead to fires and other implications that may need urgent attention, as they may affect livelihoods. And these projections could have dire consequences on the livelihoods, especially of those poor and vulnerable communities. And this elevates the risks of poverty in some communities. Key sectors dependent on climate change systems, such as tourism, agriculture, and energy, have been negatively affected by climate change, resulting in the overall loss of livelihoods and negative impacts on the economy. Rural communities are especially affected due to their reliance on natural resources such as firewood, such as land and water, and also on their reliance, because of their reliance on small-scale rain-fed agriculture as they can't afford irrigation systems. Despite the risks posed by climate change on livelihoods and the economy at large, for many years, Botswana did not have any international policy instruments dedicated to combat climate change and to adapt to climate change. More recently, there have been an effort to develop more comprehensive national strategies, national policy instruments, and frameworks to adapt to climate change. A few months ago, the country enacted the Botswana Climate Change Response Policy, but there is limited research analyzing the policy and other efforts made by the country to promote climate change adaptation. And that is where our study is coming in. So our study seeks to address the research gap by using these two objectives. We want to identify the synergies between Botswana's climate change response policy and international frameworks. And we also want to analyze the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities of the studies of the country's national strategies, policy instruments, and frameworks. So the synergies, we're into the first objective, the synergies. The international community's efforts to fight the adverse effects of climate change can be traced to so many frameworks such as the Paris Agreement, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, there's the Kyoto Protocol, the KP, the Conference of Parties, COP decisions, and Botswana is a party to all these international frameworks. The process of defining a common ground for all the parties has translated through negotiations into climate change response mechanisms addressing both the socio-economic and policy considerations. Whereas the KP addresses the mitigation targets for the developed countries, the UNFCCC requires developing countries to adopt policies that would enhance their adaptation capacities and capabilities, as well as non-legally binding mitigation measures. And in an effort to respond to existing potential climate change effects, Botswana has made a policy decision to develop the climate change policy or the climate change response policy rather, which sets out the major political intents and actionable commitments, setting the stage for formulating specific strategies and action plans to address climate change in Botswana. And the policy provides for a national vision that establishes a climate-compatible development pathway that builds the resilience of the country to shocks presented by climate change while minimizing our contribution to global warming. In addition to the policy, Botswana also has a national long-term vision called the Botswana Vision 2036, which presents our national aspirations. It mainstreams the ideals of what the country wishes to have achieved by the year 2036. And the third pillar of this vision states that by this year 2036, the sustainable and optimal use of the country's natural resources will have transformed the national economy and uplifted people's livelihoods. And this will be made possible through sustainable use of ecosystems and renewable energy resources. So if we look at this vision against the policy, we will agree that sustainability runs through the country's developmental blueprint. And in its endeavor to become an industrialized nation, Botswana intends to do so in an environmentally sustainable manner, at least in paper. So what are the strengths and opportunities? Botswana's climate change response policy and other frameworks seem to be aligned to international frameworks. Because if you read all these policies, all these frameworks and the policy, you realize that they carry the same language, the same sentiments, the same ingredients as international frameworks that aim to combat climate change. And also these frameworks, as well as the policy, are succeeding at forging the climate compatible development pathway for the country. Now, going to the challenges and weaknesses. In Botswana, sources of greenhouse gas emissions are energy, land use in its different entities. We have forestry, we have agriculture, as well as waste and industry, particularly mining and manufacturing. For those who might not know how the economy looks like, Botswana's main contributor to the GDP is mining, followed by tourism and agriculture. And through the long-term vision for the country, Botswana plans to harness fossil fuels, and energy is likely to become the major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. Botswana and other signatories of the Paris Agreement who are reliant on coal and other fossil fuels for energy are likely going to struggle in reducing their carbon emissions. And it will be more difficult for Botswana to play credible leading role in addressing climate change and sustainable development. If we look at Article 4, Section 6 of the Paris Agreement, we'll see that it provides that that least developed countries and small island developing states may reflect their special circumstances when communicating their mechanisms for low greenhouse gas emissions. It is, however, still not clear of how the special circumstances of middle-income countries like Botswana will be considered, except if you go to Article 4, Part 15 of the Paris Agreement, which states that the concerns of developing countries affected by impacts of response measures should be taken into consideration. So the question now is Botswana ready to shift from fuel-dependent industries? Is Botswana ready to shift from fuel-dependent industries? And the answer to this question, according to us, leans more towards the contrary. And it brings into light the question in sustainable development literature on whether development and environmental concerns contradict each other. So where is the source of disconnect? The decision of Botswana to use its natural resources comparative advantage in order to influence its economic development reflects the evident gap between the international political ambitions and the practical realities of individual countries. So we have seen a big disconnect between the international frameworks, which are influenced by international political ambitions, and the practical realities that are prevailing in Botswana. So we have a disharmony between Botswana's economic ambitions and the ambitions presented by some international frameworks.
Okay, Prof, we're sorry to interrupt. We're out of time, so if you can maybe make your concluding remarks, please.
Okay, what is the way forward? What is the way forward? I'll try to summarize this in a minute. Botswana should appreciate the proper environmental management and protection. And also Botswana should should realign its political, its economic, now I'm panicking because of time, its economic ambitions to its policies, because right now we have that disconnect, we have that disharmony that I have indicated. And also, okay, no, it's totally fine, because now they can read the slides. You can just project, and then I say my thank you.